19. Mr. Witt saw that in the bulletin. He says 12b. Is that a mistake? Well, sometimes, they divide a verse in half. And they don't want the first half, they just want the second half. So they want you to read the second half. So 12b through 19. Let's start there in 1 Samuel chapter 6 and verses 1 through 5. David again brought together all of the noble men, young men of Israel, 30,000. He and all his men went to Balak in Judah to bring up the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim on the ark. They set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, sons of Abinadab, were guiding the new ark with the ark of God on it, and Ahio was walking in front of it. David and all Israel were celebrating with all their might before the Lord, with castanets, harps, lyres, timbrels, cisterns, and cymbals. So they were really celebrating. Go down to verse 12b. So David went to bring up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. When those who were carrying the ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and a fattened calf, wearing an linen ephod. David was dancing before the Lord with all his might, while he and all Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and the sounds of trumpets. Verse 16, as the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window. And when she saw David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. They brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent of David, who had pitched there. And David sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings before the Lord. After he had finished sacrificing the burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord Almighty. Then he gave a loaf of bread and a cake of dates and a cake of raisins to each person in the whole crowd of Israel, both men and women, and all the people went to their homes. Father, we come before you. We thank you so very much for your word and this life for us. Pray that as we look into it, we will understand it, and we will be able to apply these things to our lives. For these are the things that are important to you and need to be important to us. Come before you and thank you in Jesus' name, your Son. Amen. So we see here in verse 1, David again brought together all the able men of Israel, 30,000 of them. 30,000 man escort. David was going to get the ark of God, and he was doing it in a big way. David was extremely happy to get the ark of God back to Jerusalem. The ark had been captured when they lost the war by the Philistines. And they had kept this ark, the people of the Philistines. And it was someplace in hiding. It had no significance to them. And I think one place said they had it for like 70 years. And that war was fought when Saul was king of Israel. And so Saul really didn't honor God that much. And so they just kind of forgot about it. But when David became king, he says, we need to get that ark back. So he prepared this huge entourage to go get this ark. Now, verse 2. He and all his men went to Balak in Judah to bring up the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim of the ark. I like to play you just a short clip about this ark of God.
And they shall make an ark of acacia wood. 2.5 cubits shall be its length, 1.5 cubits its width, and 1.5 cubits its height. And you shall overlay it with pure gold. Inside and out you shall overlay it, and shall make on it a moulding of gold all around. You shall cast 4 rings of gold for it, and put them in its 4 corners. 2 rings shall be on one side, and 2 rings on the other side. And you shall make poles of acacia wood, and overlay them with gold. You shall put the poles into the rings on the sides of the ark, that the ark may be carried by them. The poles shall be in the rings of the ark, they shall not be taken from it, and you shall put into the ark the testimony which I will give you. You shall make a mercy seat of pure gold. 2.5 cubits shall be its length, and 1.5 cubits its width. And you shall make 2 cherubim of gold, of hammered work you shall make them at the 2 ends of the mercy seat. Make 1 cherub at one end, and the other cherub at the other end, and you shall make the cherubim at the 2 ends of it one piece with the mercy seat. And the cherubim shall stretch out their wings above, covering the mercy seat with their wings, and they shall face one another. The faces of the cherubim shall be toward the mercy seat. You shall put the mercy seat on top of the ark, and in the ark you shall put the testimony that I will give you. And there I will meet with you, and I will speak with you from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim which are on the ark of the testimony, about everything which I will give you in commandment to the children of Israel.
I will meet with you, and I will speak with you. That's what God said there. Let's go on reading and starting in verses 3 through 5. They set the ark of God on a new cart as they were transporting it, and brought it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. Uzziah and Ahio, sons of Abinadab, were guiding the new cart with the ark of God on it, and Ahio was walking in front of it. David and all of Israel were celebrating with all their might before the Lord, with castanets and harps and lyres, timbrels, sistrums, and cymbals. They were celebrating. They were really happy. Amen. Now, what was the significance of this ark of God to David and the Israelites? The Ark of the Covenant, or the Ark of God, was Israel's most sacred treasure. It symbolized God's covenant with his people. It was kept in the most holy place in the tabernacle. Only once a year, the high priest entered the most holy place to sprinkle blood on top of the ark to atone for the sins of the entire nation. It was a symbol of God's presence, of God's power. The ark was a golden triangle box with 2 cherubim facing each other on the lid. Inside the ark were the tablets of the 10 commandments Moses received from God, a jar of manna, the bread God miraculously sent from heaven while the children of Israel were wandering in the wilderness, and Aaron's staff, the symbol of high priest authority. According to God's law, only the Levites were to carry the ark. The ark was constructed at the same time as the tabernacle and placed in the sanctuary's most sacred room. It symbolized, as we said before, the presence of God, the power of God. God spoke to the people of Israel between the 2 cherubims. It says enthroned between the 2 cherubim on top of the ark. And David wanted to get this ark back and into Jerusalem. It was a tremendous symbol for them. Like I said, the Philistines, hey, it meant absolutely nothing to them. It was just a relic of some kind, perhaps. Verse 12b. So David went to bring up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. But why? Why did he really want to get it? Let's go back up to verse 11. The ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite, for 3 months. And the Lord blessed him and his entire household. There were blessings to be had with this edifice. And David realized that. Let's see, where am I? And then, as I mentioned in 12b, so David went to bring up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. Let's see, get myself back on track. So David realized how precious and powerful this ark was, and he wanted to get it back to Israel's capital so that God would bless not only him as king, but the entire nation of Israel. Look at verse 13. When those who were carrying the ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and a fatted calf. Why would David stop this whole procession, these 30,000 soldiers, these well able-bodied men, all of the house of Israel, after these men carrying the ark had made 6 steps or 6 paces? Why did he stop them? And then it says David sacrificed a bull and a fatted calf. Well, there's a lot that went on between verses 6 and 12a of this passage. And the lectionary, these are the verses that it gave. It gave 2 Samuel 6, 1 through 5, 12b through 19. As I said here, there's a lot that went on between verses 6 and 12a. Let's rehearse those. Verse 6. And when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah reached out to take hold of the ark of God because the oxen stumbled. The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah because of this irreverent act. Therefore God struck him down, and he died there beside the ark of God. Then David was angry because of the Lord's wrath had broken out against Uzzah. And to this day the place is called Perez Uzzah. David was afraid of the Lord that day and said, how can the ark of the Lord ever come to me? That is to Jerusalem. He was not willing to take the ark of the Lord with him to the city of David. Instead, he took it to the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite. The ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom of the Gentiles for 3 months, and the Lord blessed him and his entire household. Now, the way this thing is going is that they got this ark from captivity, from the Philistines. They decided that they wanted to bring it down to Jerusalem. All right? They got started, but they messed up. God killed Uzzah, who was helping them to transport it. And David got afraid. David said, hey, what's going on here? We're taking the ark back, and God consumes and kills one of the men taking it. So he says, okay, I'm going to leave it here and Obed-Edom. I can't take this this ark any further. So now, all of a sudden, they get back on track in verse 12. Now David was told, the Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and everything he has because of this ark of God. So David went to bring up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. Verse 13. When they were carrying the ark of the Lord, they had taken the 6 steps. David learned something. When they got back on track, David realized the blessings that were lost by leaving that ark there at the home of this particular person, that they were missing out on blessings. So David made 2 changes. He realized, number 1, that the ark had been carried on a cart, a new cart. They said, we're going to do this thing right. We're going to make a brand new cart to carry this ark on. That's not what God said to do. You heard it up here. He says it's supposed to be this size with 2 handles going through. The handles are supposed to stay stationary, and it's supposed to be carried on the shoulders of the Levites. Okay. So they carried the ark. The second thing, it was to be carried by Levites rather than 2 ordinary citizens. So Uzzah and Ahio were just 2 ordinary people. You know, one walking in front, one walking behind. The oxen stumbled, and Uzzah reached out to secure it, to touch it. And God killed him. So now they are cautiously transporting this ark. David wanted to be sure they were doing things the right way to please God. So they cautiously took 6 steps. Then David offered a sacrifice to God. David didn't want to do things the wrong way. He wanted to make sure he was doing this thing right this time. So they made 6 steps. David said, hold it, let me just worship God. So then they proceeded. They know they had everything right. Verse 14, wearing a linen ephod, David was dancing before the Lord with all his might, while he and all Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and the sounds of trumpets. And David even changed his wardrobe while praising God. David put on the priest's attire appropriate for religious celebration, rather than his royal garb, his crown, his big robe and everything. During the time of the Israelite monarchy, kings would occasionally officiate as priests, which David did. And he danced before the Lord with all his might. They were happy, they were joyous, bringing the ark of God back to Jerusalem where it belonged. There were 30,000 young, able-bodied soldiers. There was the entire nation of Israel, led by their king, celebrating. It's interesting. For the call to worship song, we sang, "These Are the Days of Elijah." And earlier in the week, Marilyn, who was in charge of Praise Today, sent out an email to the praise team and said, would you guys listen to this song, "Days of Elijah"? She said, you know, it's a Marine Corps that's singing. And it's just interesting the way they're singing that song. And so I got an email, and I decided I'd just look at it and see. We're going to play that email, that recording, that clip of these Marines singing, "These Are the Days of Elijah." even before I gave her the title of the sermon to put in the bulletin, she had already asked the praise team to take a look at this song. They're doing it differently.
Yeah.
Okay?
They're really worshiping.
They're worshiping.
Amen.
Marine style.
Hoorah!
Now, in this video, there were only about 300 soldiers singing. They were having a worship service of sorts.
Yes.
They weren't particularly celebrating. They were worshiping. They didn't have their president there singing with them. But can you imagine what it must have been like with the children of Israel, with David, their leader, walking in front of them, 30,000 rather than 300, 30,000 soldiers, able-bodied men,
Yeah.
celebrating, dancing,
Yeah.
singing, leaping, jumping, a live band. The whole nation escorting this ark of God.
Yeah.
Was that not powerful?
Amen.
Escorting the ark of God, the presence of God,
Yes.
the power of God,
Yes, Lord.
the direction of God.
Thank you, Lord.
Verse 16. And the ark of God was entering as it was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window. And when she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. They brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings before the Lord. After he had finished sacrificing the burnt offerings and the fellowship offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord Almighty. Then he gave a loaf of bread and cake of dates and a cake of raisins to each person in the whole crowd of Israel, both men and women. And all the people went to their homes. We're talking about Michal, David's wife. Michal was very resentful in the way David was worshiping and praising God. There's a lesson in these last few verses of 2 Samuel 6. Michal resented how David was worshiping and praising God. She judged David from her point of view. I'm going to just go ahead and read to the very end of the chapter. That's not in the lectionary, but I think it's important that we do that. Verse 20. When David returned home to bless his household, Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet him and said, "How the king of Israel has distinguished himself today, going around half naked in full view of the slave girls of his servants, and as any vulgar fellow would do." David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me rather than your father or anyone from his house from the appointed, he appointed me ruler over the Lord's people, Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes. But by these slave girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor." And Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death. She said in verse 20, "How the king of Israel has distinguished himself today, going around half naked in full view of the slave girls of Israel." Okay, now let me ask you a question. Was David vulgar and half naked? No. David had on the garb of the priest. Okay? So what she said was absolutely wrong. She judged David. She said he was half naked in the view of the slave girls. He was vulgar. Was that true? No. David said, by these slave girls, I am held in honor. They respected him. And God rewarded Michal's negative and judgmental attitude by not allowing her to bear children. Now, can you imagine that? The wife of a king not bearing heirs. That's a pretty sad curse. There's a lesson in these verses for us too today. We have to be careful with our judgmental attitudes. We can't or we shouldn't judge other people's intentions. We tend to want to think for ourselves. We want to think for others, and if they don't think the way we think, then they are wrong. I'm reminded of a woman who was part of our congregation years ago. She used to criticize people for drinking Coke. She would get very upset. Now she's passed on, and they're still living. Sorry to be so crude. Watch what you say. Watch judging people. You know, we all are great in our own eyes. But are we great in God's eyes? We have our own opinions, but do they reflect God? You do things one way, other people do things differently. It doesn't mean they are wrong because they don't see things the way you think. Who's right and who's wrong? You would say that you are right, and they would probably say that you're wrong. Experiences in life are different. You don't know how a person is sliced. They don't know how you are sliced. They don't know what experience you've been in. And people do things in context as to how they were raised and how they understand and how God allows them to see things. Like I said, I don't mean to be crude, but we who are part of GCI/WCG need to learn to leave people alone. Not to be so judgmental and not to be so self-righteous. John 3:17 says, for God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him, in his name, by his actions, by being a reflection of him. If David wants to dance before me with all his might, then let him. Quite frankly, it's not your business. Leave people alone. Love them for who they are, not through self-righteous condemnation. Well, you might say, they are breaking God's command. Well, is your condemning them going to make them change? Or make you more self-righteous? How can we witness to others or outreach to others if we are condemning everything they do? Mr. Descartes Sr. used to say, were it not for Christ, there go I. Were it not for Christ, that's me. That's me. It does not mean that we condone what people are doing, but we love the person, not what they are doing. quite interesting. Last week, for just a few days, Maryland's company had a company annual meeting where they honor all of their employees. So they had it this time in conjunction with July 4th. That way they could bring all the children, all the families. Everything was paid, the housing, the food, and everything. So they made it during that time. Kids are out of school. French Lick, Indiana, all expenses paid. There's a couple there that the guy had just started. He's been there about 4 weeks. And so he was invited, of course, with all the rest of it. His wife was, you know, they say that you heard the term naked as a jaybird. Well, she wasn't that, but she was kind of close. And boy, I tell you, she had a mouth on her. But every place we went, they were behind us. They sat with us. They ate with us on the train ride. They were near us. But boy, did she have a little mouth on her. And you know what? We don't know why they were, attracted to us. And so, you know, we were friendly with them, of course. And they laughed, we talked, had beer together. But you know, if we could have written her off the first time, she would have been gone someplace else. Now, you know, it was only for just a few days, and we might not ever see her again. He works for the company. But you have to accept people. What's the term? You have to meet them where they are. And that's something that we here at GCI, we're learning that, and we're appreciating that. I'm closing now. I was in a customer's home the other day cleaning windows, and the wife of the house was there, and she was actually in the kitchen cooking, and stuff smelled really good. I mean, it's an old customer, and she's a real good cook, so stuff was really smelling great. And she was listening to Christian music. And so here I am in the other room, just, you know, cleaning the windows, and the song came on, Amazing Grace. It just happened to come on. And the one phrase that caught my attention was, how precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Now, it didn't say after I had gotten everything just right in my life, grace showed up. No. It was the hour I first believed. Grace was given to me and all of us. Okay. Father, thank you for your word. Help us to realize that we are not to judge people. We're to accept people and meet them where they are. They are just like us. It took us probably 2, 3, 4 years to get the ducks lined up in a row before we even knew what we needed to do. Help us to take this with us. Help us to learn the lesson. I'm preaching not only to the congregation, I'm preaching to myself too. Help us to take these words, to learn, and even though David was dancing and all of Israel, Father, he got a bad rap from his wife. She judged him. Your servant. Help us to realize, Father, that we have your love, we're in your love, and we want to share that with others. Thank you. In Jesus' name. Amen.